What's up, everybody? We're jumping back into the book of Acts today. We're going to be in Acts 27. We got this one and one more chapter to go. And the last thing we saw was Paul was defending himself before King Agrippa. And Paul told what he had been doing throughout his journey in Asia. And he talked about how he was preaching about Jesus. And King Agrippa even told him, "You've almost persuaded me to become a Christian." But we saw at the very end, King Agrippa said, if he'd have been judged in Jerusalem, he probably would have been set free, which we know that wouldn't have been the case. The Jews there were trying to get him. But we're going to pick up from right after that today in Acts 27. So let's jump right into it here. Said, and when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. So entering a ship of, I can't say that right, a Dramatium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us. So they decide we're going to send Paul to Italy. They're going to Rome. We're going to send him to the big spot here. So we see that they're going to sell out, and we see there's a centurion over him named Julius. So they get in that ship, which I butchered the name, and they head out to sea. Said, and the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. So Paul was kind of a prisoner, but this centurion Julius was being nice, and Paul still had liberty. He could see his friends there. He could receive care there. So God was still taking care of Paul, even though he was going through some tough stuff here. So when we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. So they're going all over the place till they finally find a ship going to Italy, and they get on it. So when we had sailed slowly many days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, the winds not permitted us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salamone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near the city of Lycia. I wish all the cities was called Fair Havens. It'd be better than all these other names. But again, we're still seeing his journey. He tells us exactly where he went and what he was doing. But now when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and ship, but also our lives. So Paul says he perceives, and this is something God does. The Bible teaches God gives us wisdom, and Paul could perceive, he could tell something was going to happen. It says it was dangerous because the fast was over. What that's talking about, it was after the Day of Atonement. So this would have been late September, early October, and Paul knew this is when the seas were probably going to get bad, which we're going to see here in a minute. And now he's the prisoner, but he's telling the folks on the ship, guys, if we continue, this is going to end in disaster. We probably need to stop right here and wait it out till sailing conditions get better. And he even tells them, if we go, there's going to be much loss, not only the cargo and ship, but it could be our lives as well. Of course, they're not going to listen to him. Said, nevertheless, the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Which makes sense. They're looking at Paul. You don't sell a ship. This dude does. We're going to go with what he says. But they didn't understand Paul had wisdom from God running through his veins, through the Spirit. But they keep going. Said, and because the harbor was not suitable to winter in, the majority advised to set sail from there also. If by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete opening toward the southwest and northwest, and winter there. So they're trying to get to this harbor in Crete called Phoenix. Said, when the south wind blew softly, supposing they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea, they sailed close by Crete. So they leave and it looks good. That happens a lot. Sometimes we want to do our own thing, even though when we feel God is giving us wisdom and the Spirit's telling us not to do something, sometimes we do it anyway. And at first it kind of seems like it's going to be okay, but not long after, I can't say that word either. Tempestuous headwind arose. A horrible wind arose. That's what happens a lot. We do our own thing and it seems good. Then something crazy happens. And this wind was called the Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught, she could not head into the wind. We let her drive. And I looked up at Euroclydon. That's called a northeaster. And that's a southwest wind, and it gets really bad during this time, and it causes huge waves. So they couldn't drive the ship anymore, and it said we let her drive. All that means is we let it go, and the ship was going wherever the wind was taking it. So they're in a mess right now. They're in this huge windstorms. Waves are horrible, and they can't even drive where they're wanting to go. They're pretty much just being pushed wherever the wind is pushing them. It says, and after running under the shelter of an island called Claudia, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. All right, so we see they're doing everything they can to keep the ship okay. They're securing everything. They're tying things up with cables. That they're afraid they're going to get into these Syrtis sands, which I'm sure was a low area. It says so they struck sail and they were driven. So they got the sail out, and again the wind is taking them away from them sands. It says, and because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. All right, so look. They're being tempest-tossed. That means they're being thrown all over the place. All right, water's going up. I don't know if you've seen these crab fishers in Alaska. I just imagine when they get in that stuff, that water's coming everywhere. They lighten the ship. They're afraid they're going to sink. Said the third day they threw their tackle. They can no longer fish. They can't provide a means to get food, which they had some food on the ship, but at this time they couldn't catch it anymore. And then verse 20, they hadn't seen the sun or stars for many days. That just means that, it's storming. They can't see the stars in the skies or the sun, and they had given up hope. It says they had finally lost all hope at the end. They was afraid they was going to die. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, men, you should have listened to me and not have sailed from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. So Paul comes in, kind of gives them some, I told you so moment here, guys. You should have listened to me, but Paul didn't leave it in destruction here. He says, even though you didn't though, listen, I urge you to take heart. No one's going to lose their life. We're going to lose the ship, but nobody's going to lose their life. For there stood by me this night an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve, saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must be brought before Caesar. And indeed, God has granted you and all those who sail with you. And then Paul tells them, hey, an angel of God, the God who I belong to and who I serve. So again, this is a ship from Alexandria. You had all these Greeks on here. They worship different gods, and this would have been a big testimony here. Paul showed them, this is the God I serve. He said he's going to grant us. He says, I've got to get to Caesar, and I'm going to get there. And not only am I going to get there, he's granted all of those who sail with you. He says, God's granted you your life too. So I'm sure the Bible doesn't teach this, but when they make it to dry ground and they're okay, I'm sure many of them started looking at Paul's God in a different way. And who knows, maybe many of them accepted Jesus. So during some terrible storm, God does something amazing to show who he is, and we've talked about that so many times here at our house and sharing Jesus. When we go through hard times, even though we may have got ourselves in it, just like Paul says, you should have listened to me. Many times we should have listened, but we still got in a mess. But in the end, God's granted us life. He's still going to take care of us. We got that in Jesus Christ. We get what we don't deserve. Sometimes we take a loss here or there, but God is ultimately taking care of us. And I encourage you, no matter what storm you're going through, which I know you hear this analogy stuff all the time, but it's the truth. No matter what you're going through, God's going to do something big through it. God's going to take care of you. Just keep looking to him. Everything's going to be okay, and he's going to get the glory for it. All right, so we keep going here. He says, therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island. So he says it's going to be exactly how God said, but we got to run this ship on a certain island. We're going to run aground. That means the ship's going to come up on it. It's pretty much going to be stuck there after this happens. It says, now when the 14th night had come and we were driven up and down in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors sensed that they were drawing near some land. And they took surroundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they took surroundings again and found it to be 15 fathoms. So they're getting closer and closer to some land here. Said, then fearing lest we should run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for days to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship, when they had let down the skiff into the sea, under pretense of putting out anchors from the prow. All right, so there's afraid they're going to run into the rocks. They drop their anchors, and then we see the sailors were going to get off the ship. They put the skiff, that's kind of the little bitty boat, the rescue boat, whatever you want to call it. It's just a small boat they'd get on. They were going to leave, so they put out anchors from the prow, but Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall off. So they're actually listening to Paul now. And I think the reason of this, Paul told them, I told you so. If you'd have listened to me to begin with, this wouldn't have happened. I told you this was going to happen. And even though the ship's like, oh, ship captain, oh, I know how this goes. I know what's going on. I've sailed these seas. They're now trusting him as much. They're trusting Paul. Paul said it was going to happen. He's now saying we can be saved. So the soldiers cut away the ropes of the skiff and let it fall. So the boat's gone now. All they are is on the ship. There's no little extra boat to get on and get out of there. All right. Said, and as day was about to dawn, Paul implored them all to take food, saying, today's the 14th day you've waited and continue without food and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is for your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. All right, so it's been 14 days they hadn't eaten. Paul says, hey, it's time to eat. You need to eat something. It's for your nourishment. He says, trust me, just eat. You're going to be okay. This is for your survival. Not a hair is going to fall from your head. Said, and when he had said these things, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then they were all encouraged and also took food themselves. And in all, we were 276 persons on the ship. So when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and threw out the wheat into the sea. So Paul speaks to them. It gives them encouragement. He's telling them, hey, go ahead and eat. Trust me, you're all going to be okay. He's preaching the blessings on them is pretty much what's happening. That's how we're supposed to be. When people's going through a hard time, if God's gave us any wisdom, we tell it, and then we encourage them. We build them up. They were encouraged, and then it says after they had eaten, they lightened the ship again. They threw the wheat. So now they have nothing pretty much. But look what happens. It says, when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And they let go the anchors and left them in the sea, meanwhile loosing the rudder's ropes, and they hoisted the mainsail to the wind and made for the shore. So they're heading for the beach now. It says, but striking a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern was being broken up by the violence of the waves. So they hit, everything else is being torn up. Said, and the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on parts of the ship. And so it was that they all escaped safely to land. So these soldiers, they were just going to kill the prisoners so the prisoners couldn't get away. Paul was a prisoner. That means Paul was going to die, the very one who had saved them. But the centurion, he knew it. He wanted to save Paul, and he commanded them, nope, we're not going to do that. If you can swim, jump overboard. and the rest and the rest, some on boards and some on parts of ship. So they were just hanging on the board ships to kind of get. It was a shipwreck is what happened right here. It looks like something out of the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. But we see they all escaped safely to land. I'm going to tell you, I love the book of Acts, especially right here at the end, and next week, Acts 28. God did something amazing through Paul. And he even told Paul not to worry about it. Ain't nobody going to get you. You're going to go to Rome. You're going to go before Caesar. And Paul's getting to do this all over the place. And I'm sure all these guys, look how many it said. If I can find it again. There were 276 persons on this boat. 276 people who should have died in a shipwreck. They are saved because the Spirit in Paul saved them. And it said they all escaped to safety. And I'm going to tell you something. Now, this was just a shipwreck here. And in the end, if they don't accept Jesus, they're still don't have safety. They're still going to die in their sins and be in trouble. That's worse than a shipwreck. But the whole reason Paul's going through this is because he's spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we see he's preaching grace. He's not preaching laws and rules. He's preaching it's through Jesus Christ you've been saved. He's preaching as you look to Jesus, you're becoming like him. Therefore, you actually do start following those laws and rules. But what makes you right is what Jesus has done. Through him, you have forgiveness of sins. And it's through him we're saved. Satan wants to come in and make a shipwreck of our lives. He wants us to do our own thing, and ultimately it's going to mess us all up. But in the end, when we accept Jesus, I'm telling you, we're all going to escape safely to land. And I just want to kind of leave that with you. We're going to be safely in the city of heavens, where we're going to be, the land where the streets are gold. And we get that through this same message Paul is preaching. The same reason he's being persecuted. He's being sent everywhere. But God is using him in all this to continue to spread his message. And that message is he wants you to put your faith in Jesus Christ. Jesus died so you could be forgiven of your sins. And if you've never done that today, hey, what are you waiting on? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a blessed one.